Today we're diving into the world of a soldier's life during the monumental Napoleonic Wars through the pages of The Diary of a Napoleonic Foot Soldier. This is written by a real foot soldier, Jacob Walter. He is desperately hungry and finally managed to steal some food from peasants. Let's get started. We hurried toward the bivouac, but on the way we found a deep stream of water and only a round tree trunk lay across it. Now the question arose how to take the horse and sacks across. I said, "Why, I will carry the sacks across and we will throw the horse into the water." And, indeed, I succeeded in getting over the narrow bridge in an upright position without the use of handrails, which feat might have cost me my life, since the river was very deep. Then the horse was thrown in and driven across with stones, the sacks were then reloaded, and we finally marched into bivouac. That was a joy. Whatever each person could not use was distributed. Then dough was made, and little balls were molded with the hands and baked, or rather roasted, in the re. This food lasted me a week, and I thanked God for the chance gift which had remained buried under the sheaves until I came. We then marched farther in a somewhat more eastern direction through Ula, Beshenkovichi, and Ostrovno, and near the end of July toward Vitebsk. Often on the way to Vitebsk, we undertook a raiding excursion. Some 30 of our men went off the main route to find a still inhabited and unstripped village. We collected our strength and walked from 3 to 4 hours in hopes of rejoining the army at the second bivouac. We were fortunate and found a village where everything still seemed to be in order. To safeguard our small group, we left a rear guard behind and agreed that they should report with certain shooting signals a possible attack from the Russians. As we entered the village, a man at once approached us who was probably sent as an interpreter from the mayor to learn our desires. We told him that we required provisions for the army. If we received them voluntarily, force would not be used. He reported it to the village, but the answer was of no good, so we were compelled 2 by 2 to take a house and search it. I joined forces with a comrade but found nothing except milk and cabbage. A wooden hut stood on a farm. This was locked, and the peasants would not open it. When we broke down the door, a woman who was with child came running at us as if mad and wanted to throw us out, but we forced her back with gentle thrusts. Here we obtained some flour, eggs, and fat. When all brought their findings together later, our booty was considerable. I am telling of this undertaking to show the ways of the Russian subjects. If they had voluntarily removed the simple covers of their storage places, much of the household furniture would have remained unspoiled, for it was necessary to raise the floors and the beams in order to find anything and to turn upside down everything that was covered. Under one such floor, which had large beams resting side by side, we found pots full of sausages stuffed into casings 4 to V feet long and filled with pieces of bacon and meat an inch thick. Although such sausages already had a fierce smell, they were quickly eaten. Here were also hidden pots filled with lumps of cheese, which according to the customs of the country had been placed as milk on the re and had been allowed to curdle so that the milk, cheese, and fat floated about in chunks. The cheese and fat were still left for us. In another well-plundered village, nothing could be found in the houses, and so, urged on by our hunger, we dug in the ground. Here I, with several others, removed a large pile of wood which had probably just been put there. We removed this, dug into the ground, and found a covered roof of planks. There was an opening under this from 10 to 12 feet deep. Inside there were honey jars and wheat covered with straw. When we had all this, we opened the jars and saw a solid, white substance with the appearance of hard wax. It was so hard that one had trouble breaking a piece with his saber, but as soon as it was put on the re, it all melted to very clear honey. Now I had honey to eat for a week, although without bread. I ate the wheat raw and wild calamus from the swamps, and in general, what garden roots were to be found had to serve the most extreme hunger. After this raiding excursion, we again met the corps in bivouac, and we came then on August 16th toward the city of Smolensk. Here my company had only 25 fit men. At Vitebsk, already regiments had been formed into a few battalions, and many officers were left without duties. Among them was my captain, whose name was Errant. Here everyone had to be prepared for battle. The city lay before us on a long ascending height, and on the other side was the Dnieper River. Even on the night of our arrival, there were a few skirmishes with the outposts and vanguard. On the morning of August 17th, every regiment was set in motion and all advanced in columns against the Russians. Here, every regiment without exception was under Re. Again and again the troops attempted assaults, but because of the greater number of the Russians, we were forced back every time on this day, since their heavy artillery stood on the heights and could hit everything. Finally, by night, we had made good our position on the heights overlooking the city, and the battle was discontinued. In the course of these events, hunger could no longer be thought of. During the night, however, I ate from my little bit of honey and raw supplies without being able to cook. The thought of the coming day alternated with fitful sleep, and in fantasy the many dead men and horses came as a world of spirits before the last judgment. Since I did not suffer the misfortune of being wounded, I thought, God, thou hast allowed me to live till now. I thank thee and offer up my sufferings to thee and pray to thee at the same time to take me further into thy protection. This and several other pious meditations I had with God, and I considered my destiny. Although it was never quiet the entire night, and though a new battle might have started at any hour, none of all my miseries was so hard and depressing as the thought of my brothers, sisters, and friends. This thought was my greatest pain, which I sought to repress with this hope. With God everything is possible, so I will depend upon his further help. As soon as the day broke, here I cannot omit the description of the length of the day and the shortness of the night. Many times when we went into bivouac for the night, the great glow of the sun was still in the sky, so that there was only a brief interval between the setting and the rising sun. The redness remained very bright until sunrise. On waking, one believed that it was just getting dark, but instead it became bright daylight. The nighttime lasted 3 hours at most, with the glow of the sun continuing. So, as soon as the day broke, we marched against the city. The river was crossed below the city. The suburbs on the northern side were stormed, set on fire, and burned up. My company's doctor, named Stoibel, had his arm shot away in crossing the stream, and he died afterward. No longer could I pay any attention to my comrades, and therefore knew not in what way they perished or were lost. Everyone fired and struck at the enemy in wild madness, and no one could tell whether he was in front, in the middle, or behind the center of the army. Finally, while cannonballs kept on raining out of the city, we stormed it. With the help of heavy cannon, most of the supporting piers on the high old city wall, on which the Russians were defending themselves from the inside, were partially destroyed. We broke through the gates, pressed from all sides against the city, and put the enemy to flight. When I entered the city, we went toward the cloisters and churches. I also hurried into the great church which stood to the right in the city on a hill facing the valley. I did not meet any of the enemy within, however. Only priests were there praying. They had on long black cowls, ragged hose, and old slippers. The church was large, and on the inside built round. It had many holy images and altars as ours do. The only difference was that there was no holy water. The church had 5 towers, one on each corner, and one in the middle of the roof. On every tower were triple iron crosses, and from each cross went intervening chains from one tower to another. This created a beautiful appearance from without. After the Russians had been stormed from the 2 suburbs, from which one road on the left leads to St. Petersburg and another on the right to Moscow, and after the wooden houses there lay in ruins, we resorted in the evening to the former camping ground. Here one saw the wounded men brought together to be operated on in a brick kiln which lay on the heights above the city. Many arms and legs were amputated and bandaged. It all looked just like a slaughterhouse. In the city itself, over half of the buildings were burned. These included, especially in the upper part of the city, many large, massive houses which were burned out on the inside. Many roofs of sheet copper were rolled up and lay about. In one building west of the city, I saw the lower story filled with paper, and on top it was burned black. Probably all the official documents had been hurried to that place. On August 19th, the entire army moved forward and pursued the Russians with all speed. 4 or 5 hours farther up the river, another battle started, but the enemy did not hold out long, and the march now led to Moshaisk, the so-called Holy Valley. From Smolensk to Moshaivsk, the war displayed its horrible work of destruction. All the roads, fields, and woods lay as though sown with people, horses, wagons, burned villages, and cities. Everything looked like the complete ruin of all that lived. In particular, we saw 10 dead Russians to one of our men, although every day our numbers fell off considerably. In order to pass through woods, swamps, and narrow trails, trees which formed barriers in the woods had to be removed, and wagon barricades of the enemy had to be cleared away. In such numbers were the Russians lying around that it seemed as if they were all dead. The cities in the meantime were Dorogobush, Semlevo, Vyazma, and Kshatsk. The march up to there, as far as it was a march, is indescribable and inconceivable for people who have not seen anything of it. The very great heat, the dust which was like a thick fog, the closed line of march in columns, and the putrid water from holes filled with dead people and cattle brought everyone close to death, and eye pains, fatigue, thirst, and hunger tormented everybody. God, how often I remembered the bread and beer which I had enjoyed at home with such an indolent pleasure. Now, however, I must struggle, half wild with the dead and living. How gladly would I renounce for my whole life the warm food so common at home if I only did not lack good bread and beer now. I would not wish for more all my life. But these were empty, helpless thoughts. Yes, the thought of my brothers and sisters so far away added to my pain. Wherever I looked, I saw the soldiers with dead, half-desperate faces. Many cried out in despair, "If only my mother had not borne me." Some demoralized men even cursed their parents and their birth. This concludes the 5th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. What do you think of Walter's adventures? Please subscribe for more episodes and leave a comment.